My 9-year-old daughter uninvited me from her wedding because I refused to pay for it. Now she's living in her in-laws' basement and her marriage is crumbling. But she never expected what I told her when she finally called me crying. I'm 47 years old. I run a creative agency that I built from scratch. And about 6 months ago, my 9-year-old daughter married a guy she barely knew after banning me from her wedding. Now they're living in his parents' basement, the marriage is falling apart, and I'm still the bad guy because I refused to finance what everyone knew was a disaster waiting to happen. The thing is, this didn't start with the wedding. I mean, there's a whole context that makes this situation even more complicated than it already sounds. Abigail is my only daughter, and when she was 12, her mother Angela and I got divorced. It wasn't one of those civilized divorces that people say are possible. It was an absolute mess. Angela remarried like a year and a half later, and then had 3 more kids with her new husband within 5 years. 3 kids. Can you believe it? And Abigail was left kind of in the background, the daughter from the previous marriage who suddenly had to compete for attention with 3 younger half-siblings. I could see how it affected her every time. She came back from visiting her mother. She'd come back quieter, more distant. Angela basically immersed herself in her new family, and Abigail became this sort of awkward relic from her past life. It's not that Angela was cruel or anything. She was just too busy with the babies and her perfect new life to notice that her oldest daughter was falling apart. So I became that classic, overprotective father, I guess. I worked like crazy at the agency. Took on any project I could to make sure Abigail had everything she needed. I paid for therapy when she started having problems at school, took her places on weekends, tried to compensate for her mother's lack of presence by being 2 parents in one. But the truth is, no matter how hard I tried, there was something broken in Abigail that I couldn't fix. When she was 17, she just dropped out of school. She didn't graduate. There was no dramatic incident. Just one day she said she wasn't going back and that was it. I spent 2 years, 2 full years, trying to get her to go back to school. I took her to more therapists, talked to school counselors, tried everything I could think of. My mother, Rose, who's like 73 years old and is one of those women who doesn't beat around the bush, came to talk to her several times. She'd tell her, "Abigail, what are you going to do with your life? Are you going to sit in your room looking at your phone until you're 30? But nothing worked. Finally, miraculously, Abigail decided to go back to school. She was 19 at that point. I mean, she should have been in college already, but at least she was finishing high school. I thought, well, this is a step forward. Things are going to get better. How naive I was. Honestly. About 6 months after going back, she met Cameron at, I don't know where, I think at a coffee shop or something. Cameron was 26 years old, worked doing deliveries for his parents' bakery, and it turns out he was also a high school dropout who had already been married and divorced once. Yeah, you read that right. This 6-year-old guy already had a failed marriage on his record. But Abigail was completely enchanted with him, talked about Cameron all the time, Cameron this, Cameron that. Like she'd met the most fascinating person on the planet. 3 months later, like only 3 months of dating, Abigail comes home and drops on me that she's getting married. Just like that, like someone announcing they're ordering pizza. I sat there on the couch trying to process what I'd just heard, because honestly, I thought she was joking. I said, "Abby, what are you talking about? You barely know him." And she tells me, "You know, Dad, when you know they're the right person, you just know, you don't need to wait years." And I was thinking, who's putting these ideas in her head? Because my daughter, the one who had spent 2 years not even being able to get out of bed to go to school, was suddenly making massive life decisions with a confidence she'd never shown before. I told her I needed to meet Cameron. I mean, if this guy was supposedly going to be my son-in-law, the least he could do was come to dinner and talk to me. The dinner was exactly as awkward as I expected. Cameron showed up in a 2009 Honda Civic that sounded like it was about to fall apart, dressed in jeans and a t-shirt that had a hole in the shoulder. It's not that I'm a snob about clothes or cars, but there was something about his attitude, a kind of lack of, I don't know, ambition? Direction? I asked him about his plans, what he wanted to do with his life besides delivering bread, and he just shrugged and said he was fine with his job for now. That maybe eventually his parents would let him run the bakery. Maybe. Eventually. Those were his big aspirations. I asked him about his first marriage and he got all uncomfortable, mumbling something about how they'd been very young and it hadn't worked out, like being divorced at 25 was something normal and not a giant red flag. After he left, I told Abigail I had serious concerns. I said, "Look, I know you think you love him, and you probably do, but love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't give you a stable future. This guy is 26 years old, didn't finish school, already failed at one marriage, and works for his parents with no plan to do anything more. Do you really think you're ready to get married when you haven't even finished high school yet?" Abigail exploded, yelled at me that I never supported her in anything, that I was always being negative, that Cameron was different from what I thought. I told her I wasn't being negative, I was being realistic, and that if they were really going to get married, at least they should wait a year, finish school, save some money, but she didn't want to hear any of that. She said she was going to marry Cameron no matter what, with my blessing or without it. My mother tried to talk to her too. Rose went to the house and told her, "Abigail, your father is right, this is crazy. What's the rush? You're not pregnant, are you?" And Abigail assured her she wasn't pregnant, that she simply loved Cameron and wanted to start her life with him. Rose told her, "Starting your life is exactly what you should be doing. But getting married isn't starting your life. It's adding someone else's life to yours. And if your own life isn't even established yet, how are you going to handle two lives together?" Abigail basically told her grandmother to mind her own business, which, let me tell you, didn't sit well with Rose at all. So things got worse and worse between Abigail and me. She kept moving forward with wedding plans, talking about dresses and flowers and venues, and I kept trying to make her see reason. One day she told me she needed money for the deposit on the place where they wanted to have the reception, like $2,000 or something. I said no, that I wasn't going to finance a wedding I thought was a mistake. She got furious. Said I was selfish, and that if her mother were a real mother, she would help her. Which was ironic because Angela wasn't offering to help either. But anyway, I reminded her that I had given her a credit card for emergencies when she was 16. A card linked to my account that she could use if she really needed something urgent. I told her that if she was going to use my money for this, it would have to be without my approval. And guess what she did? She tried to use the card to pay for the venue. So I froze it. I called the bank and froze the card. Abigail called me screaming, saying how could I do that to her? That I was sabotaging her. That I was ruining the most important day of her life. I told her I wasn't ruining anything, that if she really wanted to get married, she could do it, but not with my money. Then she did something I didn't expect. She uninvited me from the wedding. Just like that. She told me, "If you're not going to support me, then I don't want you there." And that was it. My own daughter, the girl I had raised practically alone for 7 years, was forbidding me from attending her wedding. I'm not gonna lie, that hurt. It hurt way more than I thought it could. Sometimes being a parent means not giving in just to avoid conflict. Turns out, Abigail and Cameron took out a loan to pay for the wedding. A loan, like they went into debt before they were even married. The wedding was at a small venue, basically Cameron's family and some friends. Abigail's mother showed up out of obligation but apparently left early, and I obviously wasn't there. My neighbor Sarah, who knows Cameron's family, told me afterwards that it had been a nice but modest wedding, nothing fancy, and that Abigail had looked beautiful, but also very tense. Sarah told me, "Mr. Taylor, that girl was looking for your face in the crowd the whole time. You could tell she was hoping you'd show up." That destroyed me a bit, I'm not going to lie. After the wedding, they moved into an apartment, one of those complexes where all the units look exactly the same, and started what was supposedly their life together. Not even a month passed before the problems started. Abigail had dropped out of school again to get married. Yeah, again. So she didn't have a high school diploma or a job. Cameron kept earning what he earned, doing deliveries, which apparently was like $1,800 a month. Maybe 2,000 inches a good month. They had to pay rent, utilities, food, the wedding loan payment, and it turns out Cameron also had credit card debts that Abigail didn't know existed until after they got married. I mean, basically they were broke from day one. One day, Cameron shows up at my office. He didn't call ahead or anything, just showed up and told my assistant he needed to talk to me urgently. I had him come in and he sat there looking absolutely miserable. And he tells me, "Mr. Taylor, I know things. I didn't start well between us, but I need to ask you a favor." I asked him what kind of favor, and he tells me they need help with this month's rent because they fell behind on the loan payment. And if they don't pay rent, they're going to get evicted. I sat there looking at him thinking, seriously? This is the guy who thought he was ready to get married? I asked him how much he needed, and he said $1,200. I told him, "Cameron, when Abigail told me she was going to marry you, I told her that you guys weren't financially ready for this. You decided to ignore my concerns and get married anyway. And I respect that you're adults who can make your own decisions. But that means you're also adults who have to deal with the consequences of those decisions. I'm not going to give you money." He looked like I'd slapped him. He tried to argue that it was just this once, that things were going to get better, but I didn't give in. I told him that if I gave them money now, I'd only be postponing the inevitable, that they needed to face the reality of their situation and make real changes, not just put temporary band-aids on with my money. He left without saying much more. And, like 2 hours later, I got a call from Abigail. She was furious. Absolutely furious. She yelled at me that I was a horrible father, that how could I let them become homeless, that Cameron was just trying to be responsible by asking for help. I told her, "Abby, asking to borrow money isn't being responsible, it's avoiding responsibility. And besides, why don't you ask your mother for help if you defend her so much?" She went quiet for a second and then hung up. About 2 weeks went by without hearing from her, which was strange because even when we were fighting, she'd normally send me text messages or something. Then I got a call at 1:01 at night on a Tuesday. It was Abigail, crying, saying she needed to see me immediately, that something terrible had happened. My heart almost jumped out of my chest. I thought someone had died or that Cameron had done something to her. I drove to her apartment in record time, and when I got there, she was sitting on the steps outside, still crying. I sat next to her and asked her what had happened, and she tells me between sobs that she was pregnant. My first reaction was pure panic, like everything I had feared was happening. Now there was going to be a baby in the middle of this mess. But I stayed calm and told her, "Okay, let's figure it out. Have you been to the doctor?" She said she'd taken a home test, and it had come out positive. I told her she needed to go to a real doctor to confirm and to start prenatal care, and that no matter what was happening between us, I would be there for her and for the baby. She cried more and hugged me, and for a moment I felt like maybe this, as horrible as the timing was, could be what finally brought us close again. I took her to the doctor 2 days later, and it turns out the home test had been a false positive. She wasn't pregnant. Abigail was relieved and devastated at the same time, if that makes sense. Like part of her had been excited about the idea of the baby, but also terrified. After that, she tried to use the pregnancy scare as a kind of leverage to get me to help more. She told me, "Dad, you realized you need to be in my life, right? You can't keep punishing me for marrying Cameron." And I told her I wasn't punishing her, that I'd always been there for her when she really needed me, like with the pregnancy scare, but that I wasn't going to rescue her from financial problems that she and Cameron created through their own bad decisions. She didn't like that answer at all. She told me Cameron needed a better job, that doing deliveries wasn't enough, and asked me if I could hire him at my agency. I said, "Doing what exactly?" "Abigail, I run a creative agency. I need designers, copywriters, marketing specialists, people with specific skills. Cameron didn't finish high school. He has no experience in any of this. What do you want me to do with him?" She said he could learn, that he just needed a chance. I explained that I couldn't just invent a job for Cameron just because he was her husband, that it wouldn't be fair to my other employees who worked hard to get where they are. Besides, hiring your son-in-law when he's clearly not qualified is a recipe for disaster, you know what I mean? It was going to create resentment in the office. It was going to put Cameron in a position where he'd fail. And it was probably going to ruin my relationship with Abigail even more when it inevitably didn't work out. She accused me of not giving Cameron a fair chance, of already having judged him without really knowing him. Then, out of nowhere, I got a call from Angela, My ex-wife, who hadn't talked to me in like 6 months, calls me furious, saying I'm a terrible father for not helping Abigail in her marriage. I told her, Angela, where have you been in all this? You didn't even offer to help with the wedding. You left the reception early, and now you're calling me to tell me how to be a father. She said her situation was different, that she had 3 small children to take care of and couldn't be giving Abigail money to do whatever she wanted. I said, exactly, but apparently I'm supposed to do it. Then she accuses me of being jealous that Abigail found someone, that I can't stand not being the most important man in her life. That was so ridiculous I almost laughed. I told her that if she had been a present mother in Abigail's life for the last 7 years, maybe Abigail wouldn't have been so desperate to find validation in the first guy who paid attention to her. She hung up after that. About a month after all this, Sarah, my neighbor, tells me she saw Abigail and Cameron moving their stuff out of the apartment. At first I thought maybe they'd been evicted after all, but it turns out Cameron's parents had offered to let them move into their basement. Basically, they were accepting that they couldn't support themselves, not even after only 4 months of marriage. 4 months. Part of me felt vindicated, like, yeah, exactly what I said was going to happen, but the other part just felt sad for Abigail. My 9-year-old daughter, who should be worrying about school and hanging out with friends, was living in her in-laws' basement in a marriage that was clearly failing. Sarah, who had apparently become my unofficial source of information about Abigail, would tell me things every now and then. She told me she could hear them fighting all the time, that the basement walls were thin and Cameron's parents complained about the noise. She told me Abigail looked miserable every time she saw her, that she'd lost weight, that she always had this look like she'd just been crying. I asked her if Abigail had mentioned anything about divorce, and Sarah said not exactly, but that she'd told Cameron's mother she didn't know if she'd done the right thing marrying so quickly. No kidding, I wanted to tell her, but obviously I couldn't. About 3 weeks ago, Abigail finally called me. She wasn't crying this time, just sounded tired, exhausted on a deep level. She told me, Dad, I know you were right about everything. She didn't say sorry, didn't specifically admit she should have listened to me, just said I was right. I asked her how things were, and she sighed and told me, not good. Nothing is good. Cameron and I fight constantly. We have no money. We live with his parents who treat me like I'm a child who can't take care of herself. And I don't know if I can do this for the rest of my life, I told her. Then don't, Abby. If you're not happy, if this isn't working, you don't have to stay just because you got married. Divorce exists for a reason. She said she couldn't think about that now, that she'd feel like a failure, especially after all the drama of the wedding and uninviting me and all that. I told her that understanding you made a mistake doesn't make you a failure, it makes you human. Moving forward with something you know is wrong just to avoid admitting you were wrong, that's a failure of honesty with yourself. She didn't say anything for a long while. I could just hear her breathing on the phone. Then she asked me if she could come visit me, just to talk, not to ask for money or anything. I told her, of course, that she could always come home. She came that night and we sat in the living room where we used to watch movies when she was a kid, and we just talked for hours about everything, about Angela's and my divorce, about how she felt when her mother remarried, about meeting Cameron and thinking she'd finally found someone who made her feel important. She hasn't made any decisions yet about what she's going to do with her marriage. She's still living in that basement, still fighting with Cameron, still without a high school diploma or job or any kind of real independence. But she talks to me more now. Not every day, but maybe every 2 or 3 days. And that's something. She hasn't directly apologized for uninviting me from the wedding or for all the horrible things she said to me. And honestly, I'm not sure she's going to. At least, not soon. Abigail is stubborn. She always has been. And admitting she was completely wrong about something this big is hard for her. Rose told me last week that I need to be patient, that Abigail is eventually going to realize everything and is going to need me there to help her pick up the pieces. I told her I've always been there, that that's never been the problem. The problem is that being there doesn't mean rescuing her from every bad decision she makes. Rose said, I know, son, but sometimes kids need to fall to learn to get up on their own, and you're giving her that space to fall. I guess she's right, but it doesn't make it any easier to watch it happen. The last time Abigail came over, she asked me if I Thought she was a bad person for thinking about leaving Cameron when they haven't even been married a year. I told her no. That recognizing a mistake and correcting it doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you brave. I asked her what was really holding her back, and she said, everyone's gonna say, I told you so. That they knew it was going to happen, especially you. I told her, Abby, if the only reason you're staying in an unhappy marriage is to not give people the pleasure of saying I told you so, then you've already lost. Your happiness can't depend on what other people think or say. And yes, I told you so. But not because I wanted to be right, but because I didn't want you to go through exactly what you're going through now. She went quiet again with that thoughtful look she has lately, like she's processing years of decisions in real time. I don't know how all this is going to end, honestly. Part of me thinks she's going to divorce Cameron in the next few months. Another part thinks she's going to stay because it's easier than admitting the mistake. What I do know is that I'm not going to change my position on not rescuing her financially. Not because I don't love her or don't care, but precisely because I love her and care. If I start giving her money now, I'm just going to teach her that she can make bad decisions without consequences. And that's not a lesson I want her to learn at 19, because then it's going to be her pattern for the rest of her life. Yesterday she sent me a message saying that Cameron and she had another big fight, and that he had said maybe they should take some time apart. I asked her what she thought about that, and she told me, honestly, Dad, I think it would be a relief. That was the first time she admitted so directly that things aren't working. I don't know if that means she's finally ready to make a real change, or if she's just having a bad day, but at least she's talking to me about this, instead of continuing to pretend everything is fine. It's a start, I guess, even if it's a painful and complicated start for everyone.